Okay, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be joining us from. We are about to begin our webinar on Generating Resilience Plus in the Face of Climate Change, Field Evidence from Tanzania and Mozambique. We have joining us today Michael Carter, the director of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk, and Resilience, and a professor of agricultural economics at UC Davis in California. We also have joining with us Paswel Marenya, a socioeconomist from the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT, and he is based in Kenya. We have Sarah Muya, assistant to the managing director of Suba Agro Trading and Engineering Company in Tanzania. Welcome, Sarah. And we also have Israel Muchena, director of the Agricultural Insurance Division at Hollard Insurance based in Mozambique. So we have a great collection of folks today who will be discussing some fantastic research that was done across the last couple of years. And we're excited to share this evidence with you all. Paswel, would you like to start us off? And we will move on from there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Michael, you have the field.
Thank you, Sophie, for bringing us together. I'll share the results and thoughts and implications for development of an exciting project that the panelists here were involved in a couple of years ago. We are going to share with the audience, either here or later, on how this project illustrates the possibility of generating what you will hear later in this panel discussion as resilience plus, by combining an agronomic as well as a risk management tool to have sort of a bundled agronomic and risk management tool for smallholder farmers in Tanzania and Mozambique. So to get us started in the next slide, I mean, we'll be preaching to the converted here, or preaching to the choir, if we start, explaining how risk holds smallholder farmers back, and indeed many players. So unmitigated risk, untransferred risk, weak risk markets, the inability to, stake resources in the hopes of a better outcome, but if something happens, you can recover your investments. If that is not there, then whether you are a smallholder farmer or a corporate decision maker, that cannot really hold you back. And it is very pervasive in smallholder systems. And therefore, there's a lot of evidence that this is one of the things that hold smallholder farmers back. Because of that, there's a lot of search for ways, technologies, and services to bolster the resilience of smallholder farmers, crowding investments, because that's the only pathway to better standards of living, right? So in this presentation, this discussion, we want to talk to the audience about a two-country multi-year randomized control trial that we did in Tanzania and Mozambique to test the efficacy of drought-tolerant maize varieties and a fail-safe insurance to complement the partial protection you get from drought-tolerant seeds, and then the insurance enables you to expand the spectrum of protection, if you like, and therefore have a better impact than either of the two things alone. So in the next slide, what you see is the geographic scope of our experiment, mostly northeasterly, northwesterly Tanzania, central Mozambique, large area, more than 2,000 households participated in this experiment, eventually a randomized control trial approach that Michael will explain to us in a short while. And therefore, it covers a large agroecological area, geographic area in Eastern Africa, typical of smallholder farming situations, difficult environments, subject to frequent droughts, limited market infrastructure, and what have you. And therefore, a really perfect setting for testing what we were testing in this experiment. So that's what you see there. And in the next slide, it illustrates the partnerships that we had in order to pull this off. I mean, 5 seed companies, 2 in Mozambique, 3 in Tanzania, and Sarah, who is representing Suba Agro, will talk to us today about that. 2 insurance companies, Hollard in Mozambique, Israel is here, and will share his thoughts on this experiment, and UAP participated in Tanzania. So as you can see, it was a sort of a conglomerate of partners, if you like. UC Davis, CIMMYT, seed companies, 5 of them, 2 insurance companies, not to mention local government officials in the ministries of agriculture in both countries. So it was quite an undertaking, but it does illustrate what it takes to do this kind of thing. In the next slide, what we see is the implementation of this RCT, which kind of gave us the RCT intervention itself, but also Mother Nature, as Michael likes to put it, also intervened. I mean, sadly for those who are affected for the drought, but for the lessons that we were going to learn in this project, the droughts in 15, 16 in Mozambique, and 16, 17, 17, 18 in Tanzania did provide, if you like, a natural laboratory to kind of enhance the impacts of the treatments that we had in this experiment, as Michael will explain later. So during the whole implementation period, what this picture is showing you is what we did, you know, kind of introducing the concept in the villages early on towards the end of at the start of 2015, explaining to the farmers that we were working with what all this was all about, what was insurance, how does it work, introducing the new seeds, the drought-tolerant seeds, together with insurance, randomizing all this. So all those project activities are outlined, as you can see in this picture. In the next slide, what we see is basically the baseline, one of the baseline characteristics, followed by the experimental results that we saw. So these areas, typically, these areas, from what we saw, are typically characterized by low maize yields, the principal crop, and frequent mid-season droughts, as I've just described in the previous slide. So the average maize yield is about 700.7 tons. That's pretty low, even by the standards of these challenging environments. I mean, it often goes to a ton, in some places, a ton and a half. You know, but this is what we saw. And from the results, what we saw during the mid-season drought is that fell by 25%, and it took another 2 seasons before, you know, we could, you know, during the subsequent data collections, we could see that recovering. And during this severe drought, that this would get halved, and it would not recover after 1 season. We don't have data to project when this full recovery would happen after severe drought. But the take-home message here is that you have low yields that suffer even mild mid-season droughts and take time to recover. Now, if you are a family in those circumstances, you can understand why this is a serious livelihood issue, because you have very limited yields that are also subject to being diminished anytime there's a drought. It takes time to recover. What do? It must be that, therefore, these environments are characterized by lack of resilience. I mean, what do they do to recover? Perhaps they decapitalize on inputs, fertilizer, seeds. That can't be the way to gain resilience. So if you're looking at it in that sense, or do they reduce consumption? All those things that households perhaps do in these environments to cope with these sorts of things do not promote. In fact, they do undermine resilience. So that is the context in which we were operating. So the next slide talks about the investments that has happened in the last decade and a half or so the Gates Foundation, USAID, and other funders have invested quite heavily in the development of drought-tolerant seeds. Here we are talking about maize, but also other crops. And the point is to help protect against those droughts that look mild but are seriously damaging, as the previous slide has shown. And therefore, what we see, the results have been very encouraging. In the case of drought-tolerant maize, the experimental results show that, in on-station results, that these varieties could yield up to twice the normal classical hybrids. Under drought conditions, they could yield up to 10%. So that offers you quite a decent protection if you think about it. So instead of the 25%, 30% decline, 50% decline, you could actually steady your yields. And there's a possibility you could still outperform your yields with normal hybrids, if you like. And these are selected under very rigorous selection process, as the picture shows. They manage drought in order to get the best germplasm, so to speak, the best varieties out of this process. But anyway, so this is the context. However, once you get these kinds of crops in, you need to implement them, as we introduce this discussion, with other complementary risk management tools, so that you have in your toolbox more than just one tool to deal with this. And Michael is going to pick up on this as he explains more in more detail how the process worked and what were the results in terms of resilience plus. Michael, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paswel, for that great introduction. So, I'll pick it up from here, and maybe we'll look at this picture for just a moment. So, as Paswel has so nicely explained, the drought-tolerant varieties are intended to protect against mid-season drought only. So it's a very particular kind of peril, and it's an important one, as Paswel already showed us. But farmers are exposed to other kinds of perils, such as early season drought, other things that could affect the yields of their crops. So we felt that if we wanted to provide a true resilience package to farmers, they might need protection more than against simply the single peril of mid-season drought. The other thing that was important, the CIMMYT and the Drought Tolerant Maize for Africa project developed these seed varieties. They were then made available to Suba Agro, Sarah's company, and others who then reproduced the seeds and began to market them. But we were quite curious to know that when we got out to sort of real farmers as opposed to experiment station farmers, we were quite curious to know what level of protection would actually be provided to these farmers who have the very low yield levels that Paswel already showed us, who in our samples almost nobody uses fertilizer. So would these seeds be sort of resilient enough themselves when they aren't subject to good agronomic practices because of farmers' inability to provide complementary resources that we would see on an experiment station? So for that reason, we wanted to design a complementary financial technology. And so, as I mentioned, the idea was to provide a contract, an insurance contract, an index insurance contract that could offer protection against the risks that are not well covered by this so-called single peril DT seed technology. So when we developed it, we ended up working on a contract that provided two kinds of protections. So one is if remote indicators showed that there was an early season rainfall deficit such that seeds would have trouble germinating, that would affect drought-tolerant varieties as much as any other. So the intention was to give protection against those kinds of early season rainfall deficits. And then we also developed a satellite-based biomass growth measure that's a reasonable, as I'll show you in a moment, is a reasonable predictor of maize yield. So the contract also had protection against against large yield deficits. So we put those together. and then created small area insurance zones, contract zones, which were areas of roughly 3 villages. And then the final thing we did is we felt that index insurance quality needs to be assured. So those of you who might be familiar with index insurance knows that it's based on an index that's correlated with farmers' losses, but it's not the same thing as farmers' losses. Now, that's important because you can measure the index cheaply. You don't have to go to every farmer's field. That's the advantage of index insurance. The disadvantage is that the index may be wrong. It may falsely signal that there is no loss when in fact there is. So we wanted to try to provide farmers better insurance protection than that. So what we did is the following. So this diagram, this represents actually the data from Mozambique. Each dot on this picture represents a particular village in our study and in a particular year. So we collected data retrospectively from farmers so that we could say, you know, over the past 5 to 10 years, here's what yields have been like in our data. And then we were able to see whether or not the insurance would or would not have paid off in those earlier years. So we wanted to see how well the insurance would do. So the way this diagram works, the round circles, the green ones, those are village year combinations when yields were quite good, were above normal, in fact. So if you can see my little hand thing here, this is an example where in a particular village's yields were well in excess of 100% of normal. And what we're showing on this axis is what our satellite predictor was predicting about those yields. So you can see in this dot again, they were well above normal according to farmers, and the satellite actually predicted that correctly. The blue squares are yields that are slightly subpar, they're slightly below normal, 80 to 100% of normal, but that's sort of the retained risk of farmers. The orange open circles are yields even worse. And then finally, the important ones here for our purpose are the red triangles. So those are village year combinations where there were actually severe yield losses. That is, farmers told us in our village in that year, yields were less than 60% of normal. So the way this diagram works, it shows us what years would have triggered insurance payouts. So I'm just going to focus on the vertical axis here. So this is again what the satellite is predicting. And the contracts were set up to trigger payments to farmers anytime the satellite indicated that yields were below 60% of normal, so 60% or less. So you can see all these triangles down here. That's great. The satellites and the farmers agreed what happened. So that's an example of sort of good predictive accuracy where people would have been properly, would have received proper insurance payments. But if you look in this, in here, there's actually a couple of red triangles where farmer yields were actually quite low, but the satellite would have not have issued payments. So this is a common problem of index insurance. We have an identical diagram, which I won't show you for Tanzania. And Tanzania actually does a little less well than Mozambique. The satellite does a little less well. So there are more red triangles, if you will, where payments would not have been issued. So what we did is we told farmers that if they reported to us, and we set up in Mozambique, we set up an SMS system to facilitate those communications. If indications were that the satellite prediction was incorrect, then we would send a field team out to do a traditional crop cut survey. So we call that a fail-safe system. We try to take advantage of index insurance principles, but give farmers a greater assurance that they actually will be protected, even if index fails. At the Markets Risk and Resilience Innovation Lab, we're actually doing quite a lot of work on measurement of insurance quality and index insurance quality for small-scale farmers. And this problem of incorrect prediction is actually quite a serious one. And it's one we're working with the insurance industry right now in Eastern Africa to try to remedy. So we put that together then with the DT seeds. And as Paswel showed us, we had a well-diversified study. The actual study design, we took villages, we put them together in groups of 3 that were very close to each other in most instances. And we randomly allocated one of the 3 villages to just receiving the opportunity to purchase, say, Sarah's seeds, DT seeds, another village that was given the opportunity to purchase the seeds that were bundled with the insurance. So the seeds were about 20% more expensive to cover the commercial insurance premium. And then the 3rd village in the triplet was the control village. So all the data that we're sharing with you and the results, Paswel already showed you, there was some results from the control communities come from this kind of experiments. So as Paswel showed us, that when we look at our data and we look at what Mother Nature dealt out to farmers over the 3 years of our study, we see that the control group farmers are in no way resilient to the shocks. The shocks have immediate effects and have persistent effects. They have a long tail. They last into the future. So what we were particularly interested in seeing then is, in the first instance, do these technologies cut off these immediate costs? And also we were interested in exploring the idea of what we've taken to calling resilience plus. And so resilience plus is the idea that when farmers are assured that they can survive shocks with minimal damage to their current and future well-being, that this knowledge, this protection will empower them to invest more of their scarce savings resources into productivity enhancing technologies. And so a farmer with resilience not only survives drought events, but is empowered to enhance investment and produce even more in good years. So we're going to show you that, in fact, both of these technologies worked as advertised. And not only did they mitigate the impacts of the shocks, but they crowded in additional investments and created Resilience Plus. But they did this only after farmers became convinced of the reliability of the technologies. So this is a point I'll come back to in just a moment, but farmers, like all of us, are skeptical about spending money on things that we're not sure will really help us. And we'll see it's only after farmers experientially, that is in their own field, saw that the technologies work, did they actually begin to intensify. So let me very quickly just summarize the results on yields. So the bottom diagram here is the one that Paswel showed us. So when we saw mid-season droughts for the control group farmers, yields fell about 25%. When there was a mid-season drought for farmers that were receiving DT seeds, the impact on those farmers was an increase in yields, 38% over what these had. So in other words, a 25% drop, and it was mitigated quite effectively by the drought-tolerant seeds. And there's no lingering effect that we see in the following year. And then in addition, when there were severe yield losses, the insurance did not protect anyone against the losses happened, but farmers were in fact able to recover the year. And moreover, after farmers had observed that the insurance payouts actually worked and prevented them from being decapitalized, the year following the shock, they actually purchased more seeds and intensified their investment in their agricultural. So Sophie, how much time do I have left, please?
1 minute.
Okay, so I won't be able to go into these in great detail, but let me just, there's a paper on this that we'll share with anyone who is interested. But the key result that shows that when we see this mitigation of the shocks, and we also see that there's sort of excess mitigation in the sense that that farmers begin to increase their investment. And we see it both in total expenditures that farmers make on their farms, but even in maize areas, we found that farmers, after they'd seen a shock and had received an insurance payment, or at least maybe they hadn't purchased the insurance, but if their neighbors had, then they actually intensified their production and even expanded the area that they were cultivating by a fairly substantial amount, by about 25%. So all of these things speak towards the combination of these risk management technologies improving farmers' incomes. And again, as Paswel mentioned, after severe yield shocks in the control group, we see about 25% increase in our food insecurity measure. Again, the mitigation, the insurance. So here's the increase in food insecurity, and that's offset for farmers who had the insurance protection. So it allows people not only to keep their investment going, but also to feed their families. So to conclude, we see striking evidence that these new technologies generate resilience, and they also generate resilience plus. DT seeds seem to work quite well, even for our study farmers who use few complementary inputs. So that's very good news for the breeding program that CIMMYT did. And as I mentioned, once farmers experience the benefits, both of the seeds or the seed and insurance combinations, once they've experienced the drought and seen that these technologies work, the following year, they actually begin to increase their investments in their farm. Now, this is important of what I'm calling here experiential learning, or learning by doing and experiencing shock. That's actually, as we look in the data, it's both the blessing and the curse for these technologies. So the flip side of intensification for those who learned that the technologies work is we had many farmers who experienced no drought during our study period, and they didn't see the technologies work because the bad things they're to protect it against did not happen. Now, interestingly, these farmers, they said, oh, I spent some money on this because Sarah was very convincing, or Israel was very convincing. But the next year they said, I'm not going to do it. And so the farmers who did not experience the technologies in action began to back off the intensification. So this is actually, we think, a really important problem. And we're going to talk in a moment here now about continuing efforts to take these ideas forwards. But it is a problem. How do we accelerate learning about technologies and when they only occasionally offer you a benefit? And that's a really difficult problem to think about. So a lot of governments, for example, the government of Mozambique a few years ago did basically a temporary learning subsidy on the purchase of improved seeds and fertilizer. But that may, in most years, farmers will immediately see whether or not the technology works for them. But with risk management technologies, they do not immediately see those benefits. And what we see with our farmers is once they're convinced it's great, they move forward, which any of us would do. But many people, if severe drought happens 1 in 5, 6, 7 years, it may take a long time before farmers actually see the benefit of an insurance payment. And in our study, at least many of them began to walk away. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it to Sophie and the rest of our panelists, and we'll take it from here. So Sophie.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Sarah, we would like to invite you to give some of your thoughts on your participation in this research project. If you could share with us some of your experiences, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. My name is Sarah Muya. I'm the assistant to the managing director of Suba Agro Trading and Engineering Company Limited, which is based in Tanzania. Suba Agro is an agro inputs company, which deals mainly with production and distribution of seeds, especially maize seeds, and processing of import and distribution of agrochemicals in Tanzania. The company has 7 regional branches and serves the rest of the country through a network of distributors. Suba Agro took part in this bundling seed and weather index insurance study in Mvomero district in Morogoro and Kongwa district in Dodoma for 2 seasons. And actually the villages of the chosen on these districts were very remote, and the farmers in these villages had little or no knowledge of certified seed. In this project, the company was involved as a seed distributor for drought-tolerant maize varieties developed by CIMMYT. So this project, we just used the drought-tolerant hybrid varieties. Our part was first to provide training, marketing support, information materials to farmers and village-based sales agents, because you can not only train the farmers, you also have to train those who are going to sell or rather assist you in the distribution of those seeds. On good agronomical practices to use in maize production. So if you provide them with the input, then they will use it properly to get better yields. Our second role in the project was now to sell the seed when the season starts. There are a few successes of this project, and the notable one is that we were able to create a new market, not only for our seeds, but for other agro inputs. And then farmers adapted the use of certified seed. And from that time, most of them stopped using the recycled seed. Because as I told you before, in those areas, farmers had little or no knowledge of certified seeds. So they were just using, you know, from whatever they harvest, then they plant just the recycled seed of the maize they harvested. And then the other success was the insurance payout in terms of seed was a success and enticed farmers' interest to continue purchasing seed. And actually they saw the value of the insurance. Lastly, we were able to retain the distribution network and market share to date. So in the process of the study, we established the distribution network, and up to now, I think with the project finished about 2-3 years ago, but still we are selling in those areas, which means the adoption which started by was initiated by that project is continuing to date. And then when I look back at the project, I see at the beginning of the project, I think the challenge was just that the districts chosen were so remote, so of course the distribution cost was high, but that is sort of, we can factor it in as cost of marketing for us at Suba. And then when I reflect again and see what can be done for projects like this, I think they should not be just left in the book or research papers. We need to look at ways we can scale and make it viable for private sector to invest on these tools. So to bundle it up so that it is sort of ready to use product for the market at large. Thank you. Sophie, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for those thoughts. Israel, I would love to invite you to give your perspective from being a part of the project from Hollard Insurance. If you could share your thoughts with us now, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you to all the participants that are joining us in this session. I would like to mention that we heard from Paswel when he spoke about unmitigated risk, the impact of that. And the sad truth is that the country where I am located, Mozambique, was actually reported in the German Watch survey, which was issued in 2021, as being the most vulnerable country in the world to extreme climatic events in the 10 years up to 2020. This is after Cyclone Idai, which had major impact on the economy and agricultural production. So Paswel is raising a valid concern that we are aware of these climatic risks and the impact that they have on key segments of our population. Should we leave them to the mercy of nature, or can measures be taken to protect them? Paswel also spoke about the need for risk management tools and spoke about drought tolerance. This is an important thing, not only for the farmers, but also for people like me. I work for an insurance company called Hollard. Our head office is in South Africa, and I am located in Mozambique, where one of the subsidiaries of Hollard is located. And yes, in insurance, besides trying to insure smallholder farmers, if it's a large company and they're insuring their motor vehicles and they're insuring their buildings, we insurers will always offer better rates if a building comes with fire extinguishers, if the car comes with an alarm to prevent stealing, and there is tracking of the vehicle. So all these mechanisms that you and I apply for our assets and for aeroplanes and for vehicles, they also apply in agriculture. There are certain measures that should be taken by the farmer so that if insurance is going to be used as a solution for risk transfer, it remains affordable and there remains an availability of insurance market. Then both Paswel and Professor Carter spoke about the seed companies that were involved in the projects in Tanzania and Mozambique. In continuation of our work in Mozambique, we have actually continued to work with one of the seed companies. Why a seed company? Because we have quickly realized that the traditional entities involved in the distribution of financial services, such as insurance brokers, they are not in the rural areas. They don't have the infrastructure. The smallholder farmers out there do not know them. And even if they went there, they wouldn't even know where to begin. So why not work with entities that already have infrastructure, that already know the needs of the smallholder farmers, that already have a relationship and have gained some trust from the smallholder farmers. So for us, it was one of the most important, it was almost like a eureka moment when we started dealing with these seed farmers, that we suddenly realized that, wait a minute, they may not be an insurance intermediary in the conventional sense of the word, but they are close to the people and they've got the infrastructure. And also there is an alignment of risk management needs, because when they supply their seeds, they also want to be assured that their farmers will get good yields. And if farmers are affected by climatic conditions, they would want those same farmers to be put back in the position they were in before the event in question. Professor Carter also spoke about the use of remote sensing technology. This is an important condition because if you look at a country like Mozambique, where I'm located, which is nearly 800,000 square kilometers, for an insurer with 17 members of staff, how else would we be able to survey the entire country in order to monitor and to check if the losses have occurred? So for us, the idea of using remote satellite sensing is very important, because if we can reduce our costs of servicing our product, it also means that our product remains more affordable for the target population. And being affordable, that's also an important consideration, because the same target population has issues of buying capacity. Professor Carter also spoke about quality verification. That's a very important process. We've also continued to monitor the research and to be involved in various activities focusing on how this technology can be improved. And we have been involved in exercises with, for instance, the United Nations World Food Programme around the exploration of a model of blended indices. And yes, just like what Professor Carter mentioned, at the end of the day, besides the technology, we rely also quite a lot on grounded data. And the concept of blended indices definitely acknowledges the value of people on the ground and the input that they give us. And that input contributes to the decision-making on the claims. Now, with everything that you have heard from Paswel, from Professor Carter, and the presentation from Sarah on seeds, which is very similar to our experience in Mozambique, maybe where I wanted to finish off is to say, why is this important for you and I. Why do you want to know about insurance and some of the things that we're talking about? I would like to refer you back as part of my answer, first of all, to the Maputo Declaration of 2003 by the African Union, whereby the leadership on the African continent realized that since the 1960s, when Africa started gaining independence, agriculture in Africa has been in decline. So that was the first point that was observed. And that Maputo Declaration of 2003 was followed by what is generally referred to as CAADP, which is a comprehensive African agricultural development program. So everything that we're talking about is to say, here are some solutions. What can we do together to assist in the development of agriculture? And just in case anyone is not convinced about the importance of resilience, as was referred to by Paswel and Professor Carter, the Malabo Declaration of 2014 makes specific reference to the need to build resilience, because if we don't build the resilience of the agricultural sector that we're trying to kickstart in Africa, it will be a case of taking one step forward, two steps back when natural events like Cyclone Idai in Mozambique, when they do okay. So just to finish off, I wanted to say that Paswel and Professor Carter spoke about a population of 2,000 when we were doing the pilot in 2017. We have continued with one of the seed companies, and we are currently seated at 34,400 smallholder farmers. The number 34,400 doesn't sound impressive, but one of the most important conditions I would like to note here is that I am very excited about what we have achieved, because this is not like those schemes where the government has certainly taken a decision and said all the seeds must be insured or all the farmers must be insured. This has essentially been about negotiating a private sector insurer, negotiating with a private sector supplier of inputs, and looking for ways to protect a target population and providing the solution. So for me, I'm actually very grateful for the opportunity that has been created through the seed company. And obviously, I'd like to say that if the government of Mozambique, or any other government for that matter in Africa, were to say, what can we do to support further the initiatives that have started, that would be welcome. And then still on the seed companies, the one thing that I've really enjoyed, and once again, I've just learned on the back of the work that we did with UC Davis and CIMMYT, is that at least in our region, there is a common seeds regulatory framework. And that common seeds regulatory framework was designed to create an open market for the suppliers of seeds, so that in any given territory, the farmers would not be limited to the local available capacity, and the seed companies themselves were concerned about economic advantages of setting up in some of the smaller territories. So the one thing that was done by the Southern African Development Community, SADC, was to start setting up a common regulatory framework, and the seeds regulations that are applied in Mozambique are exactly the same ones that are applied in all the other seed companies. So the concepts that we have explored in Tanzania and in Mozambique, they actually fit very well within the seed regulatory framework of all the countries in SADC. And in fact, when you go through those seed regulations, what is very interesting is that the seed suppliers are supposed to meet certain minimum rates of germination as part of quality testing. And all we are saying to the seed companies is that you already have an obligation to guarantee and certify the quality of your output, of your inputs. Why don't you partner with us as an insurer? And in addition to a germination guarantee, which you are already supposed to provide, and it's a legal requirement for you, why don't we enhance your guarantees so that we now turn the legal requirement around, and we actually start going to the farmers and proactively saying, we will actually get the coordinates in the areas where your farms are located, and we are actually going to monitor. Because when we put in our regulations in SADC and in Africa that we need X% guarantee of germination, but then we don't have the tools to monitor and track. What's the point of that guarantee? So I see here an opportunity for us to take advantage of existing regulatory framework and infrastructure on the back of that to resolve a problem which is already an issue, as Paswel and Professor Kata were talking about unmitigated risk. Thank you very much. And maybe just to finish off, I wanted to say, Sophie, just two more things I wanted to throw in. That I'm grateful to the World Bank because they have also assisted us in capacity building to support in Mozambique and the rest of the continent. And obviously I must also mention the United Nations World Food Programme, where we have started a small scheme of farmers. And one of the things that the United Nations World Food Programme is doing, and it's a notable thing, and I would want it to be registered as probably one of the responsible practices, is that they have moved to the level where they talk about conservation agriculture. And when we talk about conservation agriculture and the little bit that the farmer needs to do to protect himself, we are once again answering the question that was referred to by both Paswel and Professor Kata relative to risk management. The farmer must not be a passive recipient of some divine intervention that kicks in when natural disasters occur. What can we do? How can we improve the farming practices? And how do we protect the environment? How do we reduce problems of soil degradation? All of these concerns that are raised in both the Maputo Declaration of 2003 and the Malabo Declaration of 2014. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Israel. Really appreciate those insights. We have come to the end of our prepared remarks. So we'd like to dig in maybe to some questions. The chat is a little bit quiet, so perhaps Michael, do you have anything you'd like to kind of present or ask to the rest of the panelists?
Well, I think first of all, let's try turning our
Yes.
videos on so we can at least look like pretend we're sitting together. That was very interesting. And any participants, if you do have questions, you should be able to put them into the question and answer box. So we would certainly invite you to do that, please. Sure. I mean, I guess one thing I would, first of all, I want to thank all of us for participating in this. That was extremely interesting. And I wanted to ask Sarah a question, if I could. When we set out to do this research project, Sarah, I know we had discussions with you in Suba Agro and say, well, we want to go to places you don't normally go. And you mentioned this in your talk, like, whoa, okay. These are places where farmers we don't go, it's hard to get to, it's expensive. And, as a research group, we really wanted to look at more typical farmers in the region, but it meant some additional expense for Suba Agro, and we're really glad to hear that worked well. But I was just wondering, Sarah, as the Suba Agro, I assume you also have non-drought tolerant varieties, and I'm curious, in your sort of general portfolio, if you get feedback from farmers, do they tell you, gee, we really like these drought tolerant varieties, they come looking for them, or if you just have any reaction to what we saw in our data, and again, for our farmers that were in our study, that they become reluctant if they don't see it. And again, for farmers in our study, they were, as you said, they were moving from recycled seeds to purchased seeds. So that was a big financial investment. But for your more typical buyer that you experience, do you have discussions about drought tolerant? How do you present that to them, and how does that resonate with the farmers with whom you deal?
Actually, from all some farmers, let's say the farmers who are already using certified seed. So when you present them with these drought tolerant varieties and they get to try it, in the upcoming season, they tend to be buying your seed. They tend to be moving from whatever they were using towards your seed. Although it takes at least 3 seasons to transform the whole field into your seed. So if, let's say, a farmer was planting a variety X from another company, which is not drought tolerant, and then you introduce you, as you do with the demo this year, And then the next year, they are likely to buy maybe 2 kilograms to try to see with their own eyes. And then the upper year, then they will buy more. And then it will take about 3 seasons for them to convert completely to buy, to produce your own, your variety. And then in terms of experience in investment, when you guys came, we were actually surprised. You were trying to sell insurance. They're like, what are these people serious? Because if it was difficult for the farmer to buy the seed, how can you convince him to buy seed and insurance? But we were surprised by the results. They bought the insurance, and I think after that payout we made, if we had continued with that, I think the insurance program, up to today, we will be selling not only the seed, but the seed bundled with insurance, because they really like that, getting that, because once you have invested and then this payout comes in the other season, it's like you don't have to pay the money again to get that. And for instance, in Tanzania, it was just close to 16% premium. So getting that, like the seed we sold at, I think, 9,000, and then they bought it with insurance at 11,800. So meaning if there is drought, then the farmer only has to pay 1,000, has already paid in advance 1,800, they just get their seed. So that was a really interesting thing. But the most interesting part was farmers agreeing and accepting to buy seed with insurance. That was like, it was a really big surprise for me.
Okay, great. Yeah. Did others, again, we have a few participants online, so please submit questions in the question and answer box if you have any. Did any of the other panelists want to pose a question to others?
Well, I can certainly bring one up that we had discussed. And I think Israel really touched on that, bringing up the Malabo Declaration, kind of bringing this project from kind of a micro project in 2 countries to the potential for it to be replicated. So maybe if we have the time for everyone to give a quick comment, I'll start with Paswel. But what might a project like this take to, move it to Ethiopia or move it to Uganda? What do you think the elements are that are required to scale something like this, either commercially or with government support? That would be, I think, something that policymakers would be interested to learn more about. Paswel, maybe a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thanks, Sophie, for that question. Yeah, in my remarks, I didn't mention, let me just go back there a little bit. More than 2,000 farmers. We actually had 1,800 farmers, 850 farmers in Tanzania, and about 1,340 thereabouts in Mozambique. So more than 3,100 farmers participated in our experiment. So just to get that little detail out there. So in terms of how do you get this, replication, scaling? Sophie, in the previous project meetings, I've always brought that issue up. And in terms of the research angle, and I think Israel and Sarah will speak more eloquently to that issue more than I can ever do. But just from the research for development side of things, where Michael and myself are sitting, and then Sophie, you're trying to mediate the research and then the development angles of things, I think is to continue with the process to find ways of assisting the scaling process with the expertise that comes from, people like Michael Carter at UC Davis and his team, CIMMYT continuing the work they're doing with the germplasm, and basically not closing shop when the project ends, but finding opportunities for continued engagement. Easier said than done, because you need the mediating resources, so to speak. So I think if we get a good coalition going, which is to say research, government, and industry, that will help. So the research people will continue to have input in the process, from all the way from proof of concept to looking at the tweaks that you need to do for the real world products to take shape. So I think it's just maintaining the glue for those three major sectors in this process: academia, research for development, which is the CIMMYTs of this world, and national institutions, policy people, and then the industry, insurance, and input industry. Over to you, Kate. Over to you, Sophie, sorry.
Great, thank you, Paswel. Anyone else like to comment on that, Michael?
Sure, I'll say just a small word. Again, this is a very complex issue, and as Israel mentioned in his comments, insurance companies typically have no presence in rural areas, and we see this over and over again. And farmers say, who are these people? Why should we believe that what they're saying is true, et cetera? So one of the initiatives we've been pursuing, we call it QUIC, Q-U-I-I-C, for Quality Index Insurance Certification. We're working with a remote sensing lab in Nairobi that works with NASA, and we are in the process of setting up their certification, and we've gotten governments and insurance companies both interested in having an independent quality certification mark. So once COVID allows us to be a little more agile in experimenting with this, we want to actually see if the advertisement and provision of this mark provides additional security to farmers who may not really know the insurance company, but can say, okay, this the rocket scientists, so to speak, who understand remote sensing have tested this product, akin to what Israel said happens with the germination tests, right? So we've worked on things that are sort of the equivalent of germination tests, reliability tests, if you will, for index insurance. So we want to make that something that's independently certified and visible, with the hope and the expectation that farmers who are understandably skeptical, as we all are as consumers, will be more willing to move forward and try out these kinds of products. So I think that's another frontier area, Sophie, in answer to your question about what else might need to be done. Sophie, I would like to ask that, I think we forgot to include links, because we have both a very long and boring academic paper presenting the work we've been discussing, but we also have a shorter and version with more that's available. So let's find a way to connect the links to those, Sophie, at this stage of the presentation. And so we can take it from there. So Sophie, let's pass it back to you, because I think we're kind of at the end of our time, if I understand correctly.
Yes, we are. We have wrapped up the hour. Appreciate all of your contributions. This recording will be available on the UNFCCC Africa Climate Week website in the coming days, and will be available elsewhere on our partner websites. So please do, we appreciate your attendance today, and we appreciate your contributions, Israel and Paswel, Sarah and Michael, and hope that we are able to continue this conversation into the future. So I appreciate all of your participation, and we will be providing information at the Markets, Risk and Resilience website. That's basis.ucdavis.edu. And we thank you for your attention.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It was great to see you all. It's been a while.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye,
Okay.
Israel. Bye, Sarah.
Bye, Professor. Bye, Paswel, Sophie, Sarah.
Bye, Israel.